Stay up to date on the latest political news this election season for less. Visit inforum.news/port and get 3 months of unlimited access to our news network for only 99 cents a month. Subscribe now at inforum.news/port. This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Forum Communications Company is proud to be a part of the Trust Project. Learn more at thetrustproject.org. Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you. And joining me this Friday, as he does on every few Fridays, is Senator Kevin Cramer, who is now banned in Russia.
Oh my gosh!
There's an old saying about I think people used to market themselves like authors, or we're now banned in Poughkeepsie or something like that, right? Well, you're now banned in Russia. You can't ever go to Russia. Was that surprising to you, Senator, when you learned about that?
Here's what's funny about it. When I saw the first headline kind of scroll across my phone, I just sort of shrugged my shoulders and thought, okay, me and 99 of my closest friends, in the United States Senate. And then it turns into this Ben Stiller, Sean Penn thing. And pretty soon, of course, also remember, it was over a long weekend when there's not a lot of news content available.
Yeah.
And suddenly local media had this sort of...
I'm familiar with that phenomenon.
You know that phenomenon, right? So suddenly you have a national story with a local flair. And so anyway, all of that said, it's been one of the weirder things I've lived through, to be honest with you. But I wasn't surprised when I just thought it was this, every senator or something. I've been still, to be honest, trying to figure out what the common denominator is with the group of us that are on that list. And so I don't know if it's random or if they're just sort of running through the alphabet and pulled a few here and there. I really don't know. And now, obviously, I've been very anti-Russia and very pro-Ukraine, probably more anti-Russia than pro-Ukraine, even to the point, having gone to Kyiv, as you know. But even when I went to Kyiv in January, there's not another senator on that list that went to Kyiv in January. And that was the last official delegation trip. So I'm just trying to figure it out, but it's been amusing more than it's been interesting, quite honestly.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe we should start there, because I feel like, at least in American headlines, like for a while there, Ukraine, I think, was really the top of the minds of a lot of Americans. Other things have creeped in now, and understandably so. We have our own challenges and our own issues that we're facing, but the war in Ukraine continues, and right now the big headlines are that Vladimir Putin is obviously using his country's prodigious energy exports as political leverage against Europe, specifically trying to get them to back down from backing Ukraine. I know our Secretary of State was just there, Anthony Blinken, making what I thought was the appropriate case. Stand strong, stand behind Ukraine, don't let them manipulate you. But I think there's a larger thing here. There's really only so much Europe can do, and I realize that part of what I'm talking about is not something that can turn on a dime, because there's supply chain issues and everything. But what an opportunity for us to say, listen, don't make yourself like this green energy policy where we develop green domestically and then sort of export the dirty stuff to places like Russia. It's time for that stuff to stop. I think Europe needs to develop its own resources, such as they are, and they need to look at bringing in resources from friendly places like, Canada, Mexico, the United States. This seems like a big opportunity, I think, to change some of the narrative and say it is, from a geopolitical perspective, what we have been doing on energy isn't just bad from a market perspective, it's bad from a geopolitical perspective. Do you agree?
100%. And so when I got back from Kyiv in January, late January, the group of us, the six of us that went, had a meeting with President Biden. It was a Zoom call. It was the first time I'd ever met him, and it's the only time I've ever talked to him. And I told him, I said, Mr. President, what you have done essentially by allowing the remember at that time, it was the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was just brand new, just going online. I said, by allowing that thing to be finished and allowing them to sell to Germany, you weaponized natural gas. And that's what every Ukrainian leader I talked to, including the president, says, you weaponized it. And I said, instead of taking advantage of the opportunity to use ours. Well, anyway, all that said, since January, a lot has happened, including, of course, they've finished one season of winter, went into spring and summer, which is part of what empowered them being European countries, to plan for a different season. And they didn't need the natural gas. They were storing more natural gas that they could get. They had the entire summer to bring ships in, which they've done. They've added some import terminals. But the country that has really denied them the best opportunity is the United States. And we've denied ourselves the best opportunity, largely because people like John Kerry want to transfer their climate guilt to polluting countries. But during that same time, everybody, including the European Union's energy minister, they're called a commissioner, Kadri Simpson, has come to my office. Several individual countries' energy ministers have come to my office. Several members of parliament from several European countries have come to my office to plead with me, to continue to plead with the president and my colleagues to open up American opportunities and American energy. And we can do this. And by doing it, by the way, Rob, I mean, natural gas produced in the United States of America and shipped via liquid natural gas vessels to liquid natural gas receptacles in Europe is 40% cleaner in greenhouse gas emissions than Vladimir Putin's natural gas. In other words, it would be really good for the climate and for the environment. And even at that, John Kerry just refuses. In fact, he's basically pleaded with them not to purchase natural gas or energy from the United States of America. So you're right.
It seems like
terrible option.
Like a win-win. Yeah. You're less dependent on Russia. You're also using a cleaner gas. Maybe some of them could come into line with the Paris Accords, like as the United States being the only country that has lowered its carbon emissions.
That's right.
That was at least at one point a signatory to the Paris Accord.
But this is also what led me. You might recall, a month earlier than that, I'd written an op-ed with H.R. McMaster suggesting that we consider some sort of a carbon border adjustment mechanism that doesn't punish or put a price on CO2 in the United States and domestic CO2, but rather sets a standard of cleanliness at the U.S. level, which is very similar to what Europe's is, and say that any country that pollutes beyond that, CO2 that comes, or products that are energy intensive or CO2 intensive that come into the United States should have a tariff on them. And that isolates Russia and China and Venezuela and other, polluting countries, a lot of African countries. And it would force them to clean up their act while at the same time making our products much more valuable in the global, supply chain. And we've been working on that ever since with sort of mixed results, but we've been getting a little bit of progress here and there. Problem is, to your point, our own domestic politics has gotten in the way of doing some sensible things that would be, that would be low-hanging fruit in my mind.
The odd thing is that one of the biggest and granted, we're talking a little bit about crude oil here, not necessarily gas, but one of the biggest expansions for the oil and gas industry opened the door to shipping happened under the Obama administration.
Right.
I mean, President Obama, to his credit, to his enduring credit, was the one who lifted the export ban for crude oil for the United States. President Biden was a part of that administration. Obviously, he was vice president. He should understand, like why can't you have, I can't believe I'm going to say this, why can't you have the pragmatism of Barack Obama on this front?
Well, the difference being that Barack Obama was forced into pragmatism by a divided government. And Joe Biden so far has had a majority in both the House and the Senate from his party. What happened with the lifting of the oil export ban, and I was very intimately involved in it at very high levels, was that at the end of the day, at the end of a year, when it was time to pass a omnibus spending bill, that is the appropriation for the entire country for a year, Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House at the time, put as a condition of Republican support the lifting of the oil export ban. So we just had leverage then that we don't have now. I do think that tide's going to turn after this next election, however. And I think Rob and I, you and I have talked enough about all of the politics of all of this. Our country basically functions, forgive me for saying this, fellow Republicans, functions pretty well in a divided government. And that's why our electorate rarely allows one country to be one party to be in control for very long, because they see things like what we're living through right now in the United States with one party control. And the check and balance is what our system is, really built for. And so anyway, that's Barack Obama deserves credit. Don't get me wrong; he did sign the law, sure, but it was also forced upon him.
Just as Bill Clinton deserved credit for the compromises he made with a Newt Gingrich led House of Representatives, right, back in the 90s, right? I mean, that was the last time we truly balanced the budget. That was the last time we had welfare reform. Dramatic and meaningful welfare reform as well. Yeah. So, your point, I think, is very well made on that front. Let's stay national here for a minute. President Biden making a national speech talking about MAGA, Make America Great Again, Republicans. I don't know that I need to introduce anyone in my audience to this topic. I'm sure they've all been paying attention. Some of the stylistic choices of the speech were, when I saw those glowing red lights behind him, I was thinking, my goodness, this looks like a movie. And listen, I get it. The stagecraft is important. Yep. I understand. It's important to the communication. My criticism is not that he used stagecraft, because that's a given. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Nope. My problem was the message he was trying to send with the glowing red lights and everything. I thought it was very bizarre, and I don't know. I guess some of the other things he said. I mean, listen, I have my problems with Trumpism. And one of them, in a lot of ways, is the way that the President Trump talks about the people he disagrees with. I think that lasting political movements draw people in, don't push people out. And I think Donald Trump is very, very good at pushing people away. And so I'm thinking, if you want to be the antidote to Donald Trump, which is obviously what Joe Biden is aspire, at least he's claiming to be, then don't push people away. But you're pushing people away. You're ignoring the tens of millions of people who voted for. I mean, at the same time, you're telling us I'm trying to unite the country, but also these 75 or however many million people who voted for Donald Trump are fascists. I mean, I don't know. It was a bizarre speech. I don't think it was helpful in this divided moment. I am very much looking for anybody to be a uniter in this moment in our country right now. And boy, is Joe Biden not it.
No, so everything he says is right on point. And I too, I'm with you. I kind of like good staging. I just thought this was awful staging. I thought it looked like a bad Batman movie set. And I think it was intentionally that way. It was to be eerie and scary. And the use of two Marines as a backdrop was obviously opened him up to tons of criticism, not just by conservatives or Republicans, but by the mainstream media. He took a pounding from a number of analysts at CNN and NBC and other places. That really, one of the problems with that, I think, for him was not only that it's inappropriate, but it also brings him to the same level that they were trying to put Donald Trump at when he used military personnel in very partisan speeches. And by the way, I'm not one who thinks that politics in a presidential speech is inherently bad, generally, but this one was pure partisan. And to your point, demonizing an entire group of people as though they're all exactly the same. Now, what I worry a little bit about is that, and I shouldn't say worry, but as I've contemplated it and wondered whose idea was this and why did they think it was a good one? The only conclusion I can come up with is that they're so desperate that his own base struggles with him. Which is very interesting. That very left-wing base, the extreme base, I should say, it's not even so much left-wing because it's extreme in various ways. They don't trust him because somehow they still see him as the old Joe Biden, as though he's not gone far enough. Even this Inflation Reduction Act, which was the Green New Deal, wasn't enough for a lot of them. So he's got a base problem. And so before he can sort of attract or unify, as you're talking about, by attracting the middle ground, he still needs to shore up his base. That's how it looked to me. And that's why I think it wasn't particularly effective. Now, on the other hand, remember, none of the major networks carried the speech. So he really got all the criticism and none of the benefit from the speech, in my view. So I thought it was very odd.
It was an odd choice, although I think that's a problem across politics. Is too many people constantly trying to appeal to their base and not appealing to something larger. Sure. If that makes a lot of sense, it's really frustrating, because I think you're right. I think that's exactly what he was trying to do. He's got problems within his own base. That speech wasn't about uniting America. That speech was about uniting progressives behind Joe Biden, and that's just not. Sometimes I think we should all stop listening to the bases a little bit, and go on. But maybe that's a topic.
Well, but this is I think part of what's spawning this sort of independent movement, the third party thing. It's messy and it looks odd depending on which race and which candidates and whatnot. But I think that's part of what encourages that. But at the end of the day, Rob, I think people want to either be a Republican or a Democrat when they go into the voting booth, and we'll see how it all works out. North Dakota's probably a pretty good experiment. Right?
Boy, perfect segue. That's what I wanted to talk about next, was a couple of these independent races. Rick Becker first. He lost at the state convention, opted not to put himself on the June ballot against John Hoeven for the endorsement. Now, though, having decided to run as an independent for the United States Senate against John Hoeven. I know I look at him as going back on his word, because I was in the room when he said a lot of the things that he was going to respect the vote of the delegates and everything. Now he's saying, well, I did respect him. I didn't go on the June primary, but now I feel compelled. I didn't make any promises about the general. That seems very disingenuous to me. But what are your thoughts, first of all, about that race? Is Rick Becker, I think he's obviously going to make a difference. He's got a following. He's going to have an impact. How do you see that race playing out?
Yeah. So first of all, what I grieve about it, Rob, is that Rick Becker's a really important part of the Republican Party. And I think I probably have more regard for him than you do. But I just think in many respects, Rick is the conscience of a pretty significant part of our party. And he's a very bright person. And he's made some stumbles along the way. I think that, starting a different caucus and calling it Bastiat just added confusion and whatnot to the whole movement, and probably gave it a little more of a separate movement rather than an internal movement, which I don't think was his intention. But very few people know who Bastiat was unless you've studied economics at a pretty significant level. All of that said, Rick still, but for Rick Becker, I'm not sure that North Dakota would have gotten rid of Common Core, for example. And there are a lot of mainstream conservatives who are very concerned about Common Core. So he brings issues to a new level intellectually. And so what I grieve is that we appear to have lost him from the party. But for his sake, I think the mistake he's made is, to your point, you can parse all you want that I've kept my word. And if you can draw a technical line that would hold up in court, good for you. But this isn't a court. And we're not talking about technicalities. We're talking about emotions. We're talking about a party that's a family. And I think that I've talked to a number of Republican supporters of Rick Becker who are disappointed. And they sort of see this as a bit of a betrayal themselves, I think. Now, I hope we can get through that. When this is all said and done, I hope that we can sort of reunite, because I mean it when I say I think Rick Becker has a lot to offer our party. He has nothing to offer Democrats except defeat. The way I think it's going to play out, I think Rick is going to not do as well as I think he thinks he's going to do. I don't think he's going to do as well as I think his people close to him think he's going to do. And I think he might even be disappointed at some of the pushback that he'll receive from Republicans who would otherwise are supportive of him. And John Hoeven will be reelected to United States Senator with a lower percentage than he normally gets, or that he would get. But at the end of the day, he'll still be a senator.
Do you? One thing, talking about this in this context, and I want to move on to sure. Cara Mund next, but in this context, it seems to me sometimes we're losing sense of the importance of political parties, and it's like being a partisan or partisanship has become a pejorative, and I would argue for some good reasons. I mean, there's a problem if you're just Republicans are always right no matter what because they're Republicans.
Right.
That mentality is a problem. But on the other hand, political parties served an important function, and we've now grown, thanks to social media, thanks to the internet, we've come into an era where candidates can be independent. Like they can be independent. They don't need the political parties like they did in the past. Like in the past, candidates needed those permanent organizations that had the staff, that had, for fundraising, for all of those things. They needed them. Now they can do a lot of, as Donald Trump proved, there were a lot of Republicans. I would say the mainstream in 2016, the main Republican Party maybe didn't really want Donald Trump to be the nominee, and he bucked him. He created his own independent thing. I worry that Rick Becker's another. To me, I would like to get back to the political parties having more power to sort of enforce discipline and enforce people hanging together. And I know people are hearing that thinking, "Oh, you establishment crony, you terrible, terrible person." But I would rather have that, as messy as it is, as imperfect as it is at times, than the chaos we're having sometimes. But I don't know if that makes sense to people. But that's where my mind's been at for a while now.
I think it makes perfect sense. We are self-governed. That is what makes us exceptional and unique in the world. The United States was the first true self-governed democracy. But there was discipline built in. Now, we have a big country, and we have an awful lot of freedoms which allow us to do things. But our freedom's not a license, and I do worry that the loss of the discipline of the established institutions of politics has led to a more chaotic Wild West, if you will, or frontier. But I don't think it's lost forever. I really don't. I think that the right leadership in the right places, I think the political parties themselves being a little more attentive to movements, grassroots movements, is important. One of the things I'd say, Rob, I want to be somewhat careful. I don't want to be overly critical of any individuals, but I think a lot of people in my side of this business don't pay enough attention to what's going on around them. They become isolated fairly easily. They grow to like Washington, D.C. a little too much, or they grow to like Bismarck, more than their hometown. And that's the intoxication part of all of this. And I was thinking, well, we're going to transition in a minute to Democrats, but I was thinking just this morning and talking to some of my staff about prior to Ed Schaefer, and when Democrats had everything in North Dakota, that happened to them. That happened to their leadership, to their senators, to their governors, that they were missing what was happening right around them. And this is why I think we have to always be reminded as office holders that, you pay a little attention to the chaos. You know what I'm saying? Just pay a little more attention to the chaos.
Right. I mean, when I said I didn't like the chaos, I mean, I think the point of politics is to try to impose order on the chaos, right?
That's right.
At some point, we've got to take all of these different disparate feelings and philosophies and everything and narrow them down into policy that we can live with. Yeah. And it's interesting that you bring up the Democrats, because that's exactly where you're going to say we're not paying attention. So on the Democratic side, we had Cara Mund enter the race, former Miss America, running as an independent, and she comes out and she's talking a good game. She's above the political party. She's a person, not a party. I'm independent. I don't want, I'm independent of these two things. And then Democrats take extraordinary steps to move their own candidate out of her way. And she's fundraising with Democrats. She's getting softball interviews from, Joel Heitkamp, who, let's face it, is basically the communications director for the North Dakota Democratic Party.
It's all that's left.
She's doing all these things. And I was thinking, when I heard that, like, people like Earl Pomeroy and Kent Conrad, and I'm sorry, I got to think Heidi Heitkamp was involved in it too. I mean, this kind of seems from the outside looking in like a Heitkamp operation. And they come in and they Bigfoot their own delegates, right? The people who showed up in Minot. And they said, who you chose as a result of the convention process and the primary doesn't matter. Now that we have a new name that has come in, we're gonna Bigfoot your choice and choose ours. That, to me, it just seemed like such a mistake. Like, I mean, first of all, you're tying Cara Mund to the Dem NPL brand now, because whatever she says, it's going to seem disingenuous that she's not the Democratic candidate. That's not helpful to her. That brand is not helpful to her in North Dakota politics. But also, like, you just hurt yourselves. You just walked all over your rank and file Democrats. And I don't, as messy as the NDGOP convention was, and you were there were a lot of hot feelings in that room in Bismarck at the state convention. I was there too. But they went through it, and there was a debate, and there was a vote, and it produced a result, and the party's sticking by that result. That is so much different than what the Democrats just did. It's hard to imagine the Dem NPL sinking lower, but my goodness, it's like they're plumbing to try to find new bottoms.
Yeah, it was remarkable to me. So the whole Dem NPL brand thing is interesting that you bring that up, because I don't know Cara well. I know her. I think we all sort of feel a sense of incredible pride that she broke through and became Miss America. My gosh, in North Dakota and becoming Miss America. And it was all so cool. And this isn't what she sought. I don't believe. I have no reason to question her sincerity.
I don't know how, right. That was the point I'm trying to make. I don't know how involved she was in all of it. Yeah. I don't know, but like it or not, she's being defined. Whether she's involved in it or not, she's getting defined in the eyes of the public.
Yeah, no, she was co-opted, and she's co-opted over her views on abortion, because that matches that's more in line with the Democratic Party than Mark Haugen's pro-life position. I understand all that, and I know Mark fairly well, and but I want to back up from it, because when I think back to when I was a party chairman, now I was a young party chairman. North Dakota Republicans had a governor for 4 out of the previous 32 years. They were all Democrats in the congressional delegation, Democratic majority in the legislature. The Republicans had three statewide office holders. And in those days, we still elected the labor commissioner, who was even, and so we had 2 public service commissioners and an auditor as Republicans. I'll never forget that, trying to find coalitions to build on, to add, working with chambers of commerce, even going to rural electric cooperative boards and trying to find conservative members of their boards, and just trying to piece together more, not less. But I had great admiration for the Democratic office holders, the ones that I despised, I admired the most. I always thought that Byron Dorgan was one of the greatest communicators, the best town hall holders of anybody I'd ever seen. And he was in touch with his constituency. I think George Sinner was, as a governor, he was dominant. He understood his constituency. But as that started to deteriorate, and Obamacare, you might recall, was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back when all 3 members of North Dakota.
I remember when suddenly they didn't want to do town halls anymore.
That's exactly right. And you saw that deterioration. But here's what I admired as much as anything was their political savvy, that they had political discipline, and people, even going back to Bill Guy, who was able to utilize the trappings of the governorship, the Department of Transportation and the district offices. And they were smart strategists and tacticians. And then you fast forward to this debacle, and I think what Democrats lack right now is a strategist. I don't think, maybe Heidi Heitkamp's involved, but would you hire Heidi Heitkamp to be your strategist? I mean, particularly with women candidates. Remember, she famously outed a whole bunch of victims of abuse in a newspaper.
I broke that story.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm thinking, where are the strategists? Where's the Lucy Colludi, for example?
Ken Conrad. For those who aren't as down in the weeds, that's Ken Conrad's former Senator Ken Conrad's wife, longtime lobbyist for Major League Baseball, which is kind of how I
obviously smart people, right?
Yeah.
Really smart people. I think the Democrats they have problems. Listen, they have extreme problems in terms of their philosophy and not being in touch anymore with basic mainstream North Dakota values. But on top of that, I think they lack the day-to-day thinkers and strategists that understand how to build a majority. And so what happened when Cara got into this race is guttural instincts, their impulses kicked in, and they quickly thought, hot dog, here's our chance. She's more like us than Mark Haugen is. Let's talk to Mark. He's a good guy. Maybe he'll, gracefully exit the stage left, and we'll pull in Cara. The problem is they made two mistakes. First, they underestimated the pushback they would get from mainstream Democrats that resented this, for all the reasons you've already pointed to. The other thing is they took great measures. They were very presumptuous about Cara. Okay, so Cara is a pro-choice woman leader, obviously very smart and accomplished, but that's all they really knew about her. And they made these presumptions, and they co-opted her. And God, bless her. I mean, she willingly went along to some degree, obviously letting Bill Dixon raise money for her, and obviously a very connected Democrat. But they made a mess of things, Rob, that is hard for me to comprehend. When you made the point, when you thought they couldn't do worse. I mean, I took the last statewide Democratic office holder out of office. We now have a supermajority in both chambers of our legislature. We've had the governorship ever since Ed Schaefer, and things are going the wrong way for them. And then they do this. It boggles the mind.
Well, and it's not like they don't have some opportunities. I mean, I think I could argue, and maybe you're going to be a little sensitive about talking about this, but in some ways, the Republican majority in our state has grown a little decadent. I feel like there's some people who aren't working that hard anymore to put public service first, and there maybe, and I would say Rick Becker's frankly one of them, who's putting personal achievement ahead of public service. Maybe you disagree with that or not, but even just as a practical matter, when you have the sort of supermajority that Republicans have, it's hard to defend. It's hard to defend against the idea that we need some balance and we need some checks and balances. That's a very American notion. Democrats should be able to get some mileage out of just that alone, but yet they can't. I mean, there's a lot of very vulnerable Republican legislative candidates who are gonna get elected to the legislature this cycle because they literally have nobody else challenge them on the ballot. Democrats didn't even recruit a candidate.
Right.
And I'm wondering how easy it's going to be when Democrats are looking at what just happened to Mark Haugen, right? He stood up at the convention, he put his name on the ballot. Running for office is hard. Running for Congress is really hard. Mark decided he was going to do that for his party, and then the minute he became extraneous in the eyes of some in his party, he got thrown under the bus. How do you go to other Democrats saying, listen, I want you to take on a tough Republican incumbent in a Republican-leaning state and trust us that we're going to stand behind you? There's got to be a lot of people thinking, no thanks.
Well, first of all, they have so little to offer a candidate to begin with, and now all they have to offer is disloyalty. And let's not forget, Mark Haugen was the most successful statewide candidate on the ballot last time for them. He had the highest percentage of any Democratic challenger.
I had forgotten that, but he did. He really did.
Yeah. So Mark's not just pro-life; he's actually fairly successful, certainly by their measure. And what I would say to Mark and to others, I ran for the job for the U.S. Congress twice on the statewide ballot and lost once. 3 times for the nomination, and as you know, didn't receive it the third time. And I'm a United States Senator today. You don't have to win your first election or your first 2 or your first 3 elections to eventually serve. So right now, all of a sudden they say, once and done, or in his case, 1.5 and done. They have major problems that they've only enhanced with this, and I'm not sure if they're redeemable. The challenge, though, to your other point, and that is now we have a giant, enormous Republican tent. And where's a Mark Haugen going to go? Well, I think I'd say we'd welcome him in.
Yeah.
Now,
for all the complaints about Mark Haugen's pro-life views, that guy's a liberal. Which kind of surprised me. They were all focused in like, oh, he's pro-life. He's a closet conservative. No, I know him. I know him very well. He is not. He is progressive on a lot of issues.
He is on a lot of issues. He and I had a lot of talks when I was teaching at the University of Mary and at the night programs at the Butler Center, and I had nothing but respect for the guy. As you might recall, for all you Republicans who forgot this, my wife endorsed him in the last election. My wife endorsed Mark Haugen because character does matter, right? Because being nice is a quality that we should aspire.
And in the last election, to be clear, he ran for treasurer against
right.
Thomas Beadle, Republican.
Right, that's right. And he's pro-life, so that for a lot of people, that's what matters first, second, and third. So, but I guess now when you look at the Republican side of things, if our tent's going to be so enormous as to take in lots of people, I would submit to you that Mark Haugen, even being progressive on several other issues, fits into that tent. Now, I have too much respect for Mark to just blow sunshine at him and say that it'd be easy. A lot of people think Joe Manchin should become a Republican. Do it. I always remind them he knows what he is. He knows what he is, and let's not be disrespectful about that. And let's also not invite somebody into our party with great fervor, and then when he becomes a Republican, he becomes a rhino the next day. That's our problem. That's our discipline problem. We have to be sincere about this big tent of ours. But what does happen then, Rob, is the only fights that we can have, the only debates we can have about whether we raise a tax or lower a tax, or whether we raise spending or lower spending, is with ourselves, and that's probably not the most healthy system. But I wanted one thing though before we leave the whole topic is I would encourage people who want to study sort of the history of a lot of this. Abraham Lincoln, who is of course the first Republican president, when he was just a 25-year-old lawyer, gave a speech called the Lyceum Speech. And I would encourage people to look that speech up. It was to a group of business people or maybe lawyers, I forget. But I
think Lyceum even was the name of the group. I think it was
the Lyceum. That's what it was.
They were kind of like the Chamber of Commerce of their era, I think, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's right, something like that. But he warned, even as a mid-20s lawyer, he warned of this phenomenon of mob rule versus the disciplined institutions of politics. Now, Abraham Lincoln, utilized those institutions very effectively, as you might recall, at a convention that ultimately led to him being president of the United States. But aren't we fortunate?
You want to talk about messy conventions?
Yeah, he did. Yeah,
although, by the way, famously, all of his rivals in that process, not all of them, but a lot of them ended up bringing him into his cabinet.
Yes, he did.
The Doris Kearns Goodwin book, Team of Rivals, is excellent on that.
One of the absolute best historical biographies you could ever read. Absolutely. And I'd encourage it to anybody.
Wonderful. Let's I guess let's talk with Congress. I mean, we're coming up here. We've got budget things. We've got, we've been taking a lot of votes, but it's also a midterm year, which means, everything is through that lens. But what are you hoping Congress gets done by the end of the year?
So here's what I think we're down to. So there's the end of the year, and then there's the end of the fiscal year. The fiscal year ends September 30th. And we've yet to have an appropriation vote, which means there's, without a question, going to be what is called in swamp speak a CR, which stands for continuing resolution. That is.
When was the last time we passed? Was it? It's the Bush administration is the last time we passed a budget.
Budget. So speaking of books, if you want to read a book about that, I would read Dick Armey's memoirs, Leader. It just came out last year. Really, really good. And he chronicles every step of the way, including birth, in Canada, North Dakota, but every Congress all the way through the Clinton years where he was the majority leader in the House. Bill Clinton was president. It's epic stuff. But he ran the place the way it's supposed to be run, regular order. We haven't done that since I've been in Congress. I think I had one year where we passed all the appropriations bills on time, but we did it in tranches of I think four tranches of 3 each, minibuses, rather than 12 individual appropriations, which is the way the appropriations is set up. But lately, we've been just doing these omnibus spending bills. Long discussion. We could do a whole show on that, a whole podcast on that. Maybe we should. I get some appropriators on with me. But so September 30th, we'll have to pass some sort of a continuing resolution. I reject that notion. I haven't voted for a CR lately because I'm tired of lazy appropriating. We need to get back to where we have hearings and debate and discussion on appropriations. But that CR may very well be, which will be before September 30th, may very well be the last thing we vote on before the election. I know the House is not in. all of October. The Senate's scheduled to be in 2 weeks in October, but I know that Chuck Schumer is getting a lot of pressure from his vulnerable incumbents saying, I'd rather be home campaigning against Herschel Walker, for example, than being back here in a messy fight over gay marriage or something. So I think it's going to be the only significant bill we pass before the election. And they'll try to attach some things to it. And some of the things they'll try to attach to it will be perhaps the gay marriage bill, perhaps the Joe Biden or Joe Manchin's promised permitting reform, which I think will be little to nothing, quite honestly. I don't think it'll help passage of the continuing resolution at all. So I don't expect a lot between now and an election. But after the election, we're going to have to deal with some things like the National Defense Authorization Act, which is we've done now successfully, 61 years in a row. So we need to do that, and we'll see. A lot will depend on how the outcome of the election. A continuing resolution, I'm almost certain, will not go beyond the end of the year, which means we'll have to do something else between the election and the end of the year. And the reason I don't think it will is because I don't think Democrats will want it to. Because if they lose a majority in one or both chambers, they don't want to give up that leverage. For the next big year. So it's going to be. I think I'll be there on Christmas Eve. Quite honestly, is what my sense is. That we'll be working Christmas Eve.
It seems to be becoming an annual tradition.
It is.
Let's talk about that for a minute. Like Congress, if there's anything that's more central to Congress's job than appropriating, right, budgeting,
right.
And they're just not doing it. I think that came up, and I think even the courts now. We have the U.S. Supreme Court. Whatever your opinions about abortion, the one thing I loved about the Dobbs decision is telling, hey, legislators, legislate. If you want abortion to be legal, write some laws, right? Instead of relying on the courts to read what you want into existing law. So anyway, that's a whole other thing. What President Joe Biden coming down with the student loan forgiveness. And by the way, personally, first of all, I haven't taken any PP loans. For anybody who wants to complain that Port took this or did this or whatever. And also, my wife has some student loan debt that would seemingly qualify for this. So I'm speaking against interest here, where I think it's a bad idea. But one of the things that frustrated me is that there is desperate need for reform in higher education. There's desperate need for reform in student loan. I'm even open to the idea of some student loan forgiveness as a part of that reform. But what frustrated me is that the president, but for Congress being dysfunctional, the president essentially has an open door to come out and do what essentially is an election year vote buying scheme.
Right.
And with no reform at all tied to it. If something like this came through Congress, one would hope that there would be, okay, we're doing some student loan forgiveness, but we're also doing these other reform. And I don't know what those would be. That'd be part of the debate. But that's what, because Congress is so dysfunctional, it's just open season for presidents.
Exactly right. And when Congress legislates lazily, they leave a lot of power to the executive branch, and we have a pretty powerful executive branch. And the courts too. Like when the statutes are vague, the courts have open season. They do, and they shouldn't. And God bless the Supreme Court. You're right on the Dobbs decision and on some other things, on the West Virginia versus EPA decision.
North Dakota versus EPA, as our Attorney General always likes to correct me.
That's exactly right.
He texts me when I write West Virginia, and he goes, the appropriate titling for that is North Dakota versus EPA. It's like, all right.
Okay, I'm going to give him that. As you know, I wrote a 22-page essay on this general topic for the Harvard Law and Policy Review, which I encourage people to read if you're having trouble sleeping. But it's pretty good. Anyway, that said, it was good enough for Harvard, I guess, was the point. That said, to your point, then, by the way, this is why an appropriations process is so important, because in an appropriations process, Congress sets the priorities, year after year, and it should. I still don't think Joe Biden, I still don't think the president has the authority to forgive student loan debt. And to the degree he would have it, that would be upheld in court, and it is being challenged in court, but to the degree it would be upheld in court, it would be a very narrow group of people, as we know. But to your point about higher education reform, I think it's really difficult for Congress to reform higher education, because higher education is a state issue. And our state included, we need reforms. because the problem with it is the cost of higher education, and forgiveness of loans, free money of all types, even cheap money, creates a perverse incentive for first of all, for people to borrow money, and second of all, for the managers of our institutions to raise the cost. You do not lower cost by free money. You raise the cost. Economics 101. Bastiat would be appalled. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, yes, exactly. And that was actually my point. I mean, I don't want them making North Dakota university system policy in Washington D.C.
Right.
Far from it. But there's no question that's central to the explosion in inflation in higher education, which has been going on for decades now, is rooted in federal student loan policy. I mean, it's there. I mean, we turned getting a student loan into essentially an entitlement. And listen, I want people to get education. I am 100% pro-education, but the way we're financing it has been very, very beneficial for a lot of college administrators who are getting six-figure salaries. And I'm not real sure what. I mean, there's some here in North Dakota. They have these. They're the vice president of this, that, and the other thing. And I feel like that guy from The Office Space. Like, what do you say? What do you do here? What do you do? It seems like you attend meetings all day. So we have a lot of problems with that. It's grown decadent, but that's my word of the podcast, decadent. But I mean, again, if Congress was functioning, we could make those sorts of reforms. And maybe the deal is a broader student loan forgiveness with Democrats. Maybe that's how you grease the skids to go along with some other stuff. I'm open to the idea, but can we at least have the debate in Congress instead of the president who does not have the authority? I agree with you.
I agree. So I'm with you. So, but this does highlight a broader economic issue. When you think about the things, the services and the products where inflation exceeds the normal inflation. I made this point on one of the business shows, I think last week. They're all paid by some third party. And that's what makes it so easy to cost. Why? Same with healthcare. Take healthcare. Why is healthcare inflation so much greater than the consumer price index? It's because somebody else pays for it. Anybody that looks, and my wife looks at details of our healthcare bills, she finds errors all the time that turn out not to be errors at all. If you pay out of your pocket, it's one price. If an insurance company pays it, it's multiple for the same exact product or the same exact service. That's why they can afford to charge so much. That's why the cost goes up so much higher. Highway construction, anything that's paid by a third party, especially if it's the government, inflation is much higher than the normal.
I think you even see it as much as I'm a federalist and everything. When it's a state spending the federal government's money, boy, or even look at the property tax issue here in North Dakota, where the state tries to buy down local property taxes, and now it's local government spending the state's money. Again, you have the problem where there's that disconnect. I'm for helping people, but also like you gotta, like, they have to feel it, right? Like they have to feel the impact of their decisions.
And on the student loan part, before we leave that completely, I talked about the perverse incentive, for the student. I think a lot of people make the decision to experiment with the government's money on a freshman year at a university, and then they end up, doing something else after that. We've got to have better incentives for people to do what they're better prepared to do, or what they might want to do, or even take a little time to think about it. But how about the military person, the veteran who went into the military to pay for their education? They paid a really high price for their education.
I have family members who did that.
I
do think that's one mistake conservatives make when they talk about this issue. Is they talk about students like they're a bunch of looters, right? Like they're a bunch of they went to college and they pursued a degree in poetry or something, and now they can't make a living, and they're putting them all in that bag. And yes, there's some of that that's gone on, but don't put all students, right? They were taking advantage of what was put. They were reacting to the policy and the money that was put in front of them. Don't blame them. That's such a mistake.
It's such a mistake, but don't create a perverse incentive for them to make that mistake without some thought.
I'm not going to blame them for taking advantage of something that the government made available. Blame the government for that.
You raised the point earlier, in fact, about your wife. I hope your wife, if this is truly available and it's proven to be legal, I would hope she would take advantage of it. And you mentioned the PPP loan thing, because I know some people are comparing them. The PPP loan forgiveness was law. I wrote the law. I pushed that piece of the law through because I wanted, at the time, I wanted the incentive for businesses to keep employees as opposed to putting them on the unemployment rolls. And so anyway,
I hate that sort of politics. Like okay, so the government shut my business down. I took a loan so I could keep paying my employees, and now I'm not allowed to have an opinion about student loan forgiveness. Like, what? Yeah, ridiculous. Come on. Yeah. Let's that's baby politics. Let's grow up a little bit.
It is.
Kevin, I appreciate so much for your time today. As always, a very interesting discussion. So much going on. I thought it was going to be another boring election. I say this every cycle. There's going to be a boring election cycle in North Dakota, and then surprise, it's not. It never is. I'll never learn.
No such luck. Yeah. Well, it'll be fun to watch play out and analyze and talk about when it's post-mortem as well as in advance.
Kevin, thanks for your time.
Always a pleasure. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.